All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody who is in the room here, and I'm so glad that you were able to join us live today. We're recording this webinar for folks who weren't able to attend or for people who are not hearing about it in time. But my name is Kate. I work with the nonprofit Erica, who delivers the Environmental Farm Plan program. And I've just got a couple slides to share, and then we'll get right into the Squeal on Pigs. So just a quick overview about the Environmental Farm Plan program. So it's completely free and voluntary, and it's meant to be a whole farm assessment tool for your farm. So it'll look at things like environmental risks. It'll help you build an action plan to mitigate those risks that get highlighted. And it's valid for 10 years in Alberta. So you'll do it once, and we encourage you to renew it regularly as things change on your farm, but it's valid for 10 years. So it's based off of things like your soil and site characteristics, the topography of your land, water, wherever that might be on your land, whatever kinds as well, management practices that you're taking on your land, and then potential sources of contamination too. So why complete an environmental farm plan? So it's primarily an education and awareness tool. So we want you to work through it if it applies to you, to then learn about your farm and then being able to be a better steward of the land. We know and acknowledge farmers are already really great at that, but best management practices do change over time. We also have it as a cost reduction of costs and help to bring some efficiency on your farm where it can. It can be used as a way to meet global sustainability regulations and just goals. And it'll leave your farm in good shape.
Like it's all about a farm efficiency program.
Yeah, so it's also a requirement for some funding. So we have a quick list of different funding available out in the province as well. So that's something that you could consider too. So how to register. So if you don't already have an account of your own, you can go ahead and register for an account. And you'll be paired with a local technician. So we'll show some contact information in a little bit here, but you'll be paired with somebody who's hopefully in the same municipality as you that can help you with those one-on-one questions and give you some time probably in office as well. So the whole plan itself, it's covered by a strict privacy policy as well. So any information you input into the plan, it's strictly for you and your technician to see, no one else will. So if you wanted to, or if you had your phone out, you could go ahead and use this QR code to find the registration page, or you could just visit albertaefp.ca or .com, and it'll bring you to our website where you can find the registration information. So that being said, we've got tons of support available as well. So we've got the general inquiries that you can call, or any one of our program staff as well that specialize in the program. So just feel free to take down any of our contact information. It'll also be available on our website. But with that being said, I'm going to just kind of peter out of this and introduce Hannah. So I will stop sharing. And then I'll leave it to Hannah to start sharing. So Hannah, she's here to talk to us about the Squeal on Pigs program. So Hannah graduated from the University of Alberta with a Master's of Science in Mathematical and Statistical Biology and a Master's of Science in Applied Mathematics. Prior to taking on her current role as the wild boar specialist, Hannah worked with the Alberta Aquatic Invasive Species program, along with her canine partner, Seuss. Hannah employs her quantitative skills to support evidence-informed policy and program decisions. She lives on an acreage near Innisfree with her husband, dogs, and chickens. Take it away, Hannah.
Great, thanks, Kate. And I'm really happy to be here speaking to everyone. And I'm looking forward to sharing some information and hopefully providing some answers to any questions you have, or getting back to you if I'm not able to answer the question today. So I was thinking that today we would look at some of these things. So first, just a quick review of how wild boar ended up in Alberta and their current status in the province, what we know about where they are, why they're a threat, the wild boar control program that got created to address that threat, and some of the legislation. And we did have some legislation changes recently in December. And so I wanted to go over that. And then look at how to identify wild boar and their sign that you may come across if you're in some of our hotspot areas, as well as some resources for you to access if you're looking for some more information. So the first thing is to look at a bit of a map worldwide to see where wild pigs are native and introduced. And so they started out as a species in the Southeast Asian islands, and they spread through natural migration into Europe and Asia. And they actually diverged into two different lineages. And then in each location, they were independently domesticated. And then the domestic breeds in that location were able to hybridize and crossbreed with the wild boar ancestors that were still present. And so in North America, we have predominantly domestic breeds and European wild boar that kind of arose from that lineage, but there are some Asian breeds that are encountered on farms, but we don't really have any of the Asian wild boar ancestors. How they made their leap across the ocean was as early as the 1400s for the United States. As the colonizers were coming across, they brought domestic breeds for the most part initially on board ships to serve as food during their travel. And then as they colonized the continent, they were releasing those domestic animals to create food sources as they kind of grazed across. And so that was the initial infestation of pigs feral pigs into the southern US was actually more domestic breeds. And then in the, wrong way here. In the 1900s, people wanted to have hunting opportunities like they had at home. And so European wild boar were brought over to create sport hunting opportunities, either in fenced areas or just released into areas to do that. And so the extent of the feral swine challenge in the United States is quite a bit broader than what we see here in Canada. And it also started a lot earlier. We didn't get wild boar in Canada until the 1990s, so quite recently, really. And that was when they were brought over as part of farm diversification initiatives. And so really what we see in Canada for wild pigs or wild boar really are those European types where, the dark brown, shaggy European wild boar, instead of what is often seen in the United States, which are more feral swine, hybridized a lot of domestic genetics. And so if we look at kind of what this map suggests about the range of wild boar in Canada, we can see how this happened. This is some data from Stats Canada from 2001. And I think really the message is that in the early 2000s, there were a lot of wild boar farms on the prairies. So many people had wild boar as part of their livestock. And the distribution of those farms really mirrors the distribution of the feral wild boar populations that we see today. So if we look at a recent map that was put out by a group under Animal Health Canada that's collaborating to deliver on some of the wild pig strategy, the National Wild Pig Strategy elements, this map sort of speaks to the current distribution. And I'll just take a few minutes to talk about what it's showing, and then we can zoom into Alberta. So this is an annual snapshot. This is from 2024, and the black dots are confirmed uncontained pigs. And so those could be, feral swine, they could be escaped domestic pigs that are just out for the day, or they could be established, wild boar as well. So kind of keep in mind, all of those dots are just uncontained pigs. And the reason for this is across Canada, there's different challenges. And so we didn't just go right to wild boar for the uncontained pigs. The blue shaded areas are areas where the different programs have boots on the ground field response to wild pigs. And so this could be the Wild Boar Control Program and our contractors, or it could be the municipalities that are assisting with some of these things as well. So this means somebody had boots on the ground and they were responding to a wild boar report. And then the orange areas are where we believe we have established free living populations of wild boar. So you can see there's really like a band across the prairies, kind of in the prairie, parkland, agricultural, forest edge type habitat where we see our established populations. So if we just zoom in a little bit to Alberta to give you a better sense of where that's at, we do have some confirmed reports of uncontained pigs south of Edmonton, but the majority And all of those really are escaped domestic pigs. So we often get pictures along with that. So we're able to confirm the type of pig. And the areas where we have our established reliving populations of wild boar, there's kind of 3 areas of concern in the province, and you can see where those are. So this map is published annually. So in probably May or June, there'll be a 2025 map released. And so I'm looking forward to being able to share that with everybody. We can dive a little bit more into the information we have that helped us create our Alberta portion of that map. And so this is really all the data we had about wild boar from 2000 to 2024. So quite a few years of data. And we can just go through it kind of step by step. So the first is all of the orange squares that you see there. Those are all confirmed domestic reports. So you can see that the majority of reports, especially around the Highway 2 corridor in southern Alberta, are confirmed domestic pigs, but we do have domestic pigs kind of out and about throughout the province. And then the circles with the varying strengths of red, those are, European wild boar or hybrid reports. And the stronger the red, the more confident we were in the report. And then the purple, those are our bounty program returns. And so that's quite old data now from 2003 to 2015. But it does show you where we historically had challenges with wild boar. And so if we look at the areas, this kind of leads us to have, 3 hot spots really of where we're focusing our control efforts. And then I would say kind of 2 areas of question marks. And we have, since I made this slide, gotten a little bit more insight into what's happening in the Northwest region up in the Peace there. So one of the things we had from there was quite a few bounty returns. And so that would always made us think, well, perhaps there's a population up there we just don't know about yet. And we did have a few confirmed reports, but not very many. And so it was always a bit of a challenge, because if we were to send somebody up there to do some trapping, it would be hard to know where to send them. And so this fall, one of our trappers actually was able to go up there and meet with the municipalities and speak with a lot of landowners. And he visited most of the locations where we had bounty returns from and spoke to landowners. And really what he learned is that in some cases, folks had farmed wild boar, and through the bounty program, they were sort of turning in ears from wild boar that they had actually contained. And so that would explain a little bit why we don't have an established population up there. So that gave us some confidence that there's no unknown established population of wild boar up in the Peace. There were a few spots where he wanted to go back and do some scouting in a different season, but nothing that's of a serious concern. So that was really good to get that extra boots on the ground effort there. And then I circled the Saskatchewan border as well. Similar to the rat control program, we do keep an eye on our eastern border, because Saskatchewan also has wild boar farms and has a similar challenge as we do in Alberta with wild boar at large. And so really we want to keep an eye on that. And I think you can see there in southern Alberta, we had one confirmed report there coming in the South Saskatchewan River Valley. And that shows you that I think River Valley corridors are big movement corridors for wild boar. And so in terms of our monitoring along the Saskatchewan border, focusing really on those corridors, wildlife movement corridors, will be important. Something else that's always nice to look at is some data from someone else. So here's some data, 40 years of sightings from Dr. Ryan Brook at the University of Saskatchewan. And I think it's a good confirmation that our understanding of the wild boar situation in Alberta is probably on track, because the hotspots that we have are reflective of what he has in his data as well. So I think our understanding of their distribution is pretty good. So looking now at some of the characteristics and getting into why they're such a threat and a concern, is really they're a very successful invasive species. I think they've been listed as one of the world's top 100 destructive invasive species, and they're certainly very successful at it. And the main characteristic they have that makes them so good at being invasive is the high reproductive capacity. Female wild boar can reproduce as early as 6 months old if they have good food and habitat, and they can have multiple litters a year of on average 6 piglets. And so, you can imagine how much more quickly their population would increase compared to some of our native big game species, ungulates like moose and deer. So their reproductive capacity is really high. They're very adaptable. They can live in many different habitats and they can withstand large temperature ranges. So if you think about in Alberta going from 30 degrees in the summer to minus 30 degrees in the winter, they are able to adapt to those temperature ranges and adapt to different types of habitat. Really, the only constraint they have on their habitat is they have to be close to water because they don't sweat. And so they use water to cool and they'll wallow in all seasons, even in winter sometimes. So being close to water is important. And they're also adaptable in terms of their diet. So I think I've heard it described that they'll eat pretty much anything that fits in their mouth. They're omnivores and they'll eat lots of things below ground. So they're roots and tubers of plants, invertebrates that live below ground like slugs and snails. They'll eat all parts of the plant, anything the plant produces. They're also known to scavenge and also predators of small animals, for example, amphibians and small mammals and the young of different animals. So really very adaptable in terms of their diet. And so they're able to find food in most places. And so they're able to succeed in many different areas. And the last thing is they're quite intelligent. They learn quickly. They're very aware of their surroundings and they become suspicious when they notice changes in their surroundings. And because of their social structure, wild boar live in groups called sounders, and that's usually several adult mature sows and their offspring, possibly multiple generations of their offspring, with the males moving out into bachelor groups around 10 months of age and then becoming sexually mature around a few years old, and they'll start searching for receptive females in the sounders. So because of this social structure and with the sounders living together, a lot of learning is passed on to the next generation about what is a threat. So these characteristics make them very successful as an invader and difficult to control. Some of the other behaviors they have are one of the reasons why they're so damaging. Rooting is one of the primary ways that they search for food. And you can see from some of these pictures here that the rooting is really destructive to the soil structure. It can increase erosion and spread other invasive species. And it also destroys kind of any of the below ground ecosystem, as well as potentially kind of the above ground ecosystem. So very destructive, but also a good clue that there's wild boar in the area. Something else that they do, I mentioned a little bit already, is that they need to wallow to stay cool. And I think I have some wallowing photos, a few here, but more coming up a bit later. But their wallowing behavior can also be quite destructive. So they can destroy sensitive wetland areas or contaminate water as they're wallowing, and they could be defecating and urinating in the water. And a lot of that sensitive area that other species rely on for breeding can be damaged through their wallowing behavior. And then, of course, any trampling that they may do that could destroy crops as well. So even if they're not necessarily rooting in the crop, but they're traveling through it or they're bedding in it, then they're trampling and destroying that. So that's one of the threats that they pose, is this damage. The next is just their role in the ecosystem. They compete with and predate on our native wildlife and eat our native plants. And you can really think of them like ecosystem engineers. Through their rooting behavior, they're changing the ecosystem. They could be really foraging intensively in an area on a particular plant species and removing kind of the next generation of those plants. They will consume anything that's living on the ground. So for example, the eggs of ground nesting birds or other small amphibians and reptiles. So very disruptive to the ecosystem and the food webs. And I put a few pictures in here also because often people ask about predation and the role of predation and whether we have any predators in Alberta that could help control our wild boar populations. And certainly they are interacting with predators out on the landscape. I should have added a picture with cougars. So we see often that the interactions with predators tend to push wild boar around. So when bears move into an area, the wild boar will move off, often not far, but to one of their alternate kind of bedding areas. And the same we see with cougars. We don't have a ton of overlap between wild boar and wolves, I think there is some thought that of all the predators, we don't really see predation on wild boar by bears or cougars, but I think wolves, because of their hunting, social hunting approach, I think that they would potentially be have an impact on wild boar, and I think that's an area where we could really benefit from some more information. But again, in a lot of our hotspots, kind of in that prairie parkland and getting to the edge of the boreal forest, we don't really have strong wolf populations, and so we haven't had the opportunity to really observe their impact. The last thing that is a threat that wild boar bring, and I think has really come to the front in the last, especially the last year or two, is their ability to carry many diseases and parasites that can affect animals and people. So they host a lot of different diseases, up to 39 different diseases that they can transmit to other species, including a lot of reportable diseases that are of concern for many livestock producers. I think the largest one that's really made the news a lot in the last few years is African swine fever. This is a swine-specific disease. It cannot infect humans, but it has a very high mortality rate, and it has spread not to North America yet, but in many other parts of the world, where it's had a huge impact on the domestic swine herd and the pork industry. And so we really worry about that here in Canada, because if we were to detect African swine fever in Canada, it would immediately close our pork export market, and we export around 70% of our pork products. And so this would have a very disruptive and detrimental effect on our pork sector. In terms of these diseases, I just always like to remind people, if you are, consuming wild boar, that you should take steps when you're handling the carcass and processing it and cooking the meat to make sure you're safe. So wearing gloves, and then also cooking the meat to 160 degrees Fahrenheit to make sure to kill any pathogens or parasites. Through our collaboration with the University of Calgary and also King's University in Edmonton, we have found trichinella and toxoplasmosis in some of the wild boar in Alberta. So similar to our bears, they do carry that trichinella parasite. And so that's why to cook the meat to the appropriate temperature. So because of all these risks and the presence of wild boar, we established the Wild Boar Control Program. And the goal of this is to have a coordinated approach to eliminating the threat of wild boar in Alberta. And I think I would really emphasize, although the program lives with Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation, it really is a partnership. We have a lot of great partners. Alberta Pork has been very supportive of the program, helping us get our trapping program off the ground, although we have since transitioned it to the government, but they're still very involved with some special projects. Then the Alberta Invasive Species Council has really led our outreach and education component through the Squeal On Pigs campaign that they deliver. They go to a lot of outdoor shows, boat shows, they make presentations, and they help get the message out about Squeal On Pigs. And as I mentioned, we work really closely with the municipalities. And so the fieldmen, other staff at the municipalities, the trappers that they work with are really important partners in this program for us. We do have crop insurance for wild boar. So they're listed as a species under the Wildlife Damage Compensation Program that the AFSC administers. And we do quite a bit of professional control and monitoring that's done by our contractors in collaboration with our municipal partners that I'll touch on a little bit and can share some information about how that's going. And then we collaborate quite closely with a few universities, the University of Calgary being the biggest one. They have a research study looking at the disease risks for the livestock industry from wild boar that I'll just touch on a bit. But we do always want to make sure we're collaborating with scientists so that our program is really grounded in science. So just talking a bit more about the Squeal On Pigs campaign, there's a ton of resources available through this. Hopefully you've had the chance perhaps at some shows that the Alberta Invasive Species Council has been at to get some stickers, or through your municipality. But really the goal is to encourage people to report sign and sightings of wild boar so that we can follow up. And there's lots of different ways you can report listed on the slide. And that's really what the Alberta Invasive Species Council has been helping us with. Just a little bit more about the research project with the University of Calgary that's funded by Results-Driven Agricultural Research. They have 3 students that are working on different components. So Devin Fitzpatrick has been looking at the spatial ecology of invasive wild boar in Canada. So really looking at the animal, the wild boar as an animal, and how their sounders are structured and what that means for disease transmission. Then Luis has been looking at the interactions between wild boar and livestock. And so he had a survey that went out to producers to understand if farmers were seeing wild boar incursions onto their property and whether there was any interactions with their livestock. And so he's been working on that part of the question. And then Ocean is looking at the infectious diseases in wild boar. And so she's taken samples that we provided from all of the wild boar that our program has captured. And she's done a variety of tests on those and has recently started sharing some results about what she's finding. So she's focused primarily on diseases that would be important for pork production. Part of the study has been doing some collaring of wild boar. And so this is to inform really what their home range size is like, what their habitat use patterns is like, how they're interacting between sounders. And so I think overall the university has collared 5 wild boar and they have just 1 collar out at the moment. So that's been very helpful. Something else we're using the collars for is to act as spy pigs. And so the collared wild boar can lead us to other wild boar that we're able to then remove. So something else I wanted to touch on were the regulation changes that were relatively recent, so just December 1st. So the first change that happened, and these were really to protect Alberta's agriculture, natural resources, and animal and human health. The first thing is that wild boar were declared to be a pest in all circumstances. So prior to this, they were a pest only when at large. But now we've made this the case in all circumstances. And so just as a reminder of what it means that they're a pest now, is that owners and occupants of land and the local authority must actively prevent their establishment or control or destroy them. And it also means that it's now illegal to keep, obtain, dispose of, or transport wild boar. And so this has made it no longer allowed to farm wild boar in Alberta. Now we realize that there were existing wild boar farms and they need support and time to adjust to the new regulations. And so we provided the wild boar on-farm exit program. And so for those who chose to exit the industry voluntarily, they could access compensation through this program. And that was for both their animals and the fencing, because prior to this, there were some minimum containment standards for wild boar farms. And so they had invested in fencing to meet those standards. And so this program provides compensation for fencing as well as animals. And the idea is that they will wind down their operations and so continue to raise their existing animals to market size and disperse through their usual markets, and then get the compensation on top of that profit that they're able to make. And because we wanted people to be able to do this and market their animals, the final dispersal date for most participants is the end of May 2027 to give them time to really grow out their animals. So we're still in the transition period at the moment, but I would say the vast majority of farms have decided to exit and take advantage of this compensation. Producers did have the opportunity to apply for a permit to be grandfathered under more strict regulations. So the other 2 changes that were made, one was to prohibit hunting and trapping of wild boar with some exceptions, which I'll touch on in a moment. And the other is to make it mandatory to report wild boar kills. And this reporting is important because it helps us really understand if we're missing anything about where the challenges are. So just touching a bit more on the hunting and trapping prohibition and what the exceptions are. So for owners and occupants of land who are controlling wild boar on their own land, they do not require a permit because it is their responsibility under the Pest Act to take action to control pests on their own land. And so they need to have the tools to be able to do this for wild boar. And they can also have people assist them with this control. So if they have farm workers or neighbors or friends and family who are able to assist them, those people also don't require a permit. So we really wanted owners and occupants of land to have the ability to manage their own land, and that included wild boar control. Now for commercial pest or wildlife control professionals, so for example, our contractors fall under this category. If there was a private pest control company in Alberta that wanted to do wild boar control, this would be them as well. They're required to have a permit. And the reason for this is we wanted people who were doing this in a commercial capacity to be kind of following best practices, doing it to the gold standard, and also working closely with our wild boar control program. So they need to apply for a permit for this. And then we also have a permit for Indigenous harvesters. So hopefully this provides some clarity around the hunting and trapping prohibition. So in terms of the government side of things and our control, I've definitely heard some concerns expressed from different sides that, if these regulations are prohibiting hunting and trapping of wild boar, how are we going to get rid of this pest? And so I wanted to really put that to rest. So in addition to landowners taking action on their own property, we also have professional trappers who are contracted by Alberta Agriculture to assist with wild boar control on public lands, and they're also available free of cost to landowners. So if people want assistance with this, because it can be quite time and resource consuming, they're available for them as well. And they really go about this in two ways. So they are very strategic. They go through intelligence gathering to understand where the wild boar are, how many there are, how the sounders are moving, what their home range is like, what their seasonal movement patterns are. And we use all the tools we can for this. So it starts with public reports through Squeal On Pigs. We do a lot of scouting out on the land, and I'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the signs of wild boar presence that they look for. They speak with landowners, because without landowners, our program would not be able to be successful. So it's through those collaborations that we really are able to be successful. And then we use lots of technology, including cameras and thermal drones, to understand where the wild boar are. So once we have a good understanding of what's happening in the area, then we have some lethal control options that we use to capture and remove them. Our focus really is on whole sounder trapping. And we have either the corral traps with the remotely activated gates that you can see there, where we're able to monitor the sounder using live video and determine once they're all in the trap to drop the gate. Or we use a passive style catch trap, that's this net option. It's another option, particularly in areas if there's no cell reception or it's quite rugged and remote and difficult to get to. But I would say so far the corral trap has been our go-to trap. So that's sort of what we're taking. And I would say we have 5 contractors that are working with Alberta Agriculture now. They're really experienced people. They have a lot of training under their belt. They work really hard, and I have a lot of confidence in them. So between kind of those guys that are out there working, the fact that they have access to top of the line equipment, and we have very sound best practices for doing these, I have a lot of confidence that we'll be able to eradicate wild boar in Alberta. So one thing that comes up a lot is sort of how well are you doing? And so the question of monitoring and evaluating our program. And so I wanted to touch a little bit on that. So really, are the control efforts working? And at this point, we have basically 2 sources of data to answer this question. One is the wild boar reports. So you can see there the number of wild boar reports over the years, broken down by wild boar or hybrid or domestic pigs, or things that turned out not to be pigs at all. And I think one thing you can see from this, and just keep in the back of your head, is reports are not a great indicator of what's happening with the population. So they're very biased, because where there's more people living, you tend to get more reports because there's more eyeballs out on the land. When there's a lot of information about wild boar in the media and news stories, people get more engaged and they tend to report more. So you can really see there when Squeal On Pigs launched in 2022, we had a big increase in reports because public awareness went up. And I think it's great for more people to be aware. Getting the public reports is such an important piece of our program. But just to keep in mind that just because the reports spiked doesn't mean all of a sudden there was more wild boar. And just because reports are going down might not mean that there's less wild boar. It could just be that people are not reporting as much. So that gives you a sense of at least where the pigs are. And then we can also talk about how many wild boar have been removed. And so you can see there over the years, the number removed. So in 2019 was when we first started our trapping efforts. And the first 2 years, it was one person who was doing that. And he was really figuring out how to bring a lot of the technology and approaches used in the States up to Alberta and adjust them for our climate and for our topography and habitat. And so in 2021 is when Alberta Pork came on board. They were able to hire 2 contractors. And so you can see there was a huge increase in removals. And then those started to kind of taper off. And it's interesting to think about, I think as humans, we want to make inferences about why that is, but there are a lot of underlying factors in terms of the number of trapping days and effort and the land that people had access to that could be kind of hidden in terms of explaining those patterns. Then in 2024, the trappers moved over to agriculture and irrigation, and we were able to hire 2 additional people. And so we sort of see an increase again. So a lot of questions come from this. And I think importantly, in the next step, I'll talk about how we're working with the University of Calgary to really put some good science behind this before we make any judgments about what's happening. And so that's what we've been doing in collaboration with Matthew Prouveau, who's in the group that I spoke about earlier. And so basically, we're looking at trying to model with all the data we have the occupancy of wild boar, so their distribution. And ideally, over time, we'd like to see their distribution contract as we're taking our control efforts. And this takes a whole bunch of different data, from drone flights to ground scouting to camera traps, and combines them together to estimate their distribution. And the thing that's helpful about this is it can also give us a quantification of how certain we are they're absent. And so once we think we've eradicated them from an area, it gives us some level of certainty that we're not just missing them, that they truly are gone based on all the monitoring efforts we've done. The other thing we're looking at is doing some population modeling. And so we take a lot of data from all the pigs that we capture, and that includes their age, their pregnancy status, the number of fetuses. And from that, we can get some population models and try to understand whether the population is going up or down. So we have these 2 approaches that we're trying to put, because if you just say, oh, we've removed 100 wild boar this year, well, if it's 100 out of 105, you're doing great. But if it's 100 out of 400, then you might not be doing as well. So we really need to get some scientific rigor behind our data. I would say that kind of my gut and what our trappers think and what we're hearing from our landowners is that we are making good progress. We're seeing a lot fewer wild boar in the areas we're working. We're also seeing, we used to see sounders with kind of several mature sows and multiple generations of their offspring, but now we're really just seeing very small groups, kind of a sow and 1 generation of offspring. And so I think those are all good indications that things are going in the right direction. So we're at the very early stages of these models, and we're in the process of reorienting our field efforts to be able to collect the data that is needed for this. But I think really I've come to understand that this is important for the public to really report on what the program is doing and whether we're being successful, but it's also important for our trading partners. So the fact that Alberta has wild boar is, puts a lot of questions in the mind of our trading partners that take our pork exports. And so if we're able to demonstrate that we're dealing with this potential disease threat, then that will keep our markets open for our pork producers. So kind of finishing here, but just going back to the animal and to give people an idea of what to look for when they're out and about on their properties. This is kind of your typical wild boar, and a little bit about how they differentiate from domestic pigs. And so really the facial profile, I think, is the most differentiating factor. It's really the long, elongated nose with the flat facial profile. And you can really see that in the skull comparison there, compared to the domestic, which has a much shorter facial profile with a dished face. And then I think the next thing is the body shape. So wild boar tend to be quite tall and sort of a shorter body shape, whereas our domestic breeds are often shorter with a longer body shape because they've been bred for meat production. And so there's a lot more meat on a domestic breed than you might see on a wild boar. Then, of course, the coat. We do see some hybridization, and we have seen some spotted wild boar when we were doing our captures, but for the most part, they're kind of the traditional dark-colored wild boar with the frosted tips and the thick coat. And then the juveniles, the piglets, have a really distinct stripe pattern. And so there is one breed of domestic pig, the Mangolisa pig, that also has striped juveniles, but otherwise that sort of indicates wild boar genetics. So that gives you a sense of how to differentiate. And so then I just have a few pictures comparing here, because we do get a lot of domestic pigs sometimes mistaken for wild boar in reports. So again, thinking about the body shape and the face, you can sort of take a look at those pictures and really see the difference between some of the darker colored domestic pigs compared to the European wild boar. I think it's always great to get reports of any pig that people see out and about if there's any question that it might be a wild boar. So, you know, I'm never disappointed when I confirm that it's a domestic pig, because that also is a bit of a risk for disease transmission. And so I just wanted to highlight here, these are all pictures of domestic pigs that I had reported since October. So we do get quite a few reports. And if you look at our report data, it's almost half of our reports are confirmed to be escaped domestic pigs. So I think this speaks a lot to the need to contain our domestic animals as well, to ensure that they're not out and about doing damage and potentially contracting diseases or interacting with you know, wild boar at large. So thinking a little bit about the sign, you can look for the traditional sign like tracks and scat. I think some of the other sign we're going to talk about will be much more useful for you when being out on your land and looking for signs of wild boar. But the tracks are very similar to deer. I think the biggest difference is really the dew claws. So when the dew claws are evident in the track, you can see they're really outside the track. So I always think about it like if you have kind of like your hands in like this, that the dew claws are quite outside. So if you made the track, they would really be noticeably outside the line of the track compared to deer. And then the scat is tricky. It's not a very good sign because since they're omnivores, they can eat all sorts of different things and it changes their scat quite a bit. So depending on what they're eating, it could range from something that looks more like deer to something that looks more like bear. So not necessarily a great indicator. I think also it doesn't tend to persist very long in the landscape, so we don't really see it that much. But you can look for those things. I think some of the impacts on the land are much more noticeable. So if there are wild boar around, you'll see wallows, and these can range from things that are quite extensive to much smaller areas. And I think what we've really seen is wild boar don't like to wallow, they don't like to post hole. And so they won't be wallowing in the middle of a swamp. They're much more likely to wallow in a tire track that's filled with water, for example, than kind of in the middle of a swamp or on the edge of a lake necessarily. Something else that will be apparent if there are wild boar in the area is the rooting. And again, this can range from small areas to extensive areas where it looks like someone has almost rototilled. And you can see that they even do it in winter. So we see it quite a bit in areas with peat. They really seem to like the peat in the winter. And they're rooting up. And especially in the spring, they'll go after the quackgrass roots, any of those new shoots coming up. And so you'll often see that rooting. Something else you might come across are nests. This is kind of like their bedding area. And they might be nests where they're raising young and quite extensive, like the one under that spruce tree there, or they could just be more like a day bed or a resting area between feeding bouts. And so, for example, under those willow trees. And then in the bottom, you can see a wild boar in the nest. So the nest can get quite extensive. They really tend to have a lot of grass. And in the winter, you can tell how warm they are because you'll actually see the snow kind of melted out from around that nest area. Spruce trees tend to be a particular favorite for wild boar. So when going out to scout an area, we always make sure to check out any stands of spruce that are in the area because likely that will be a place for a wild boar sign. And that kind of points to the last few signs that you can look for. So you have wild boar rub a lot. So any trees, you can look and see whether there's rubbing on the trees. And a good indication to differentiate from other species is that the wild boar rubbing will be lower than some of the ungulate species. And also because they often tend to wallow, you'll also see mud pasted onto the trees as well. So if you see muddy rubbing on trees, that's a good indication that it's wild boar. And often if it's spruce trees, the hair of the wild boar will get stuck in the sap as well. And so you can see on the bottom right there, wild boar hair is really distinctive. It's kind of like a paintbrush bristle. It's quite strong, so it's very difficult to break. And then the end they have split ends. So they'll be forked like that, either 2 or 3 fork like that. And so that is really unique. Our other ungulate species don't have those forked ends. So if you have barbed wire fences and you're finding hair stuck in the barbs and some of them have forked ends like that, that's a good indicator that they're wild boar in the area. And then of course they do tend to travel always in the same routes between their feeding and bedding areas. And so you'll often have very clear trails. So lots of good things to look at out on the land about to see whether you have wild boar in the area. So just wrapping up, I wanted to leave people with some resources. The Alberta Invasive Species Council is a great spot to get resources about Alberta invasive species, including wild boar, and very Alberta specific focus there. So their website, abinvasives.ca. There's also a new website called Wild Pigs Canada that was put together as part of the Canadian Invasive Wild Pig Strategy. And so it has a ton of information about what's happening in all the different provinces, as well as more information about just the biology of wild pigs. And then, of course, alberta.ca/wild boar would put you in connection with our wild boar control program information. And you can always reach out through the email as well. So hopefully that gives you an overview a bit of kind of the status of wild boar in Alberta as we understand it, what's being done to address the threats they pose, and how you might be able to take a bit of a scout around your own property if you're in one of those hotspot areas to see whether you might have wild boar on your property. And I think with that, Kate, I'm happy to take any questions as well.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you. So I have put it in the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in there. Or you can totally unmute yourself and just ask your question too. So it's up to you, whatever you're most comfortable with if you have a question.
And if people think of things afterwards, don't hesitate to email me. And all the emails that go to wildboar@gov.ab.ca come to me. So I'm happy to respond to questions then as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and we have just about 10 minutes left. So got any other questions, anybody in the room? Feel free to let them go. Or if you'd like, you can just kind of drop off the call too, whatever makes the most sense for you.
Yeah, I think if people think about things they wish we would offer in terms of information for landowners about wild boar, that would be another great thing to kind of send my way as well, because we're always looking for opportunities. Alberta Pork's very supportive of a lot of outreach and engagement. So hopefully we can offer something to people.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. So
yeah, it's great. I'm so glad to be able to be here today to give this presentation.
We're getting some applause as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording. So if that's also stopping you from asking a question, go ahead, ask your question.